Brielle was the first to notice the oddly shaped book lying beneath a broken lamppost at the far end of the deserted alleyway. The city's glow barely reached that narrow passage. Even if a stray pedestrian had wandered in, the darkness would have quickly turned them away. Brielle's eyes, sharper than most from years of living on the streets, gleaned it. A heavy tome with a worn leather cover beside a toppled trash bin. She knelt and picked it up, wiping off a thick layer of grime with her sleeve. The cover was marked with strange, swirling engravings that made her heart flutter with curiosity. The rest of her ragtag family of street orphans, Silas, Petra, and Manny, crowded around, peering over her shoulders at the faint gold lettering that decorated the spine. Days had passed since they'd last eaten a decent meal, and their hunger gnawed at them constantly. Most kids living on the street wore their misery openly, but not Brielle. She was determined to protect the younger orphans and to show them that hope and wonder still blossomed in unexpected places. Silas, the tallest and most skeptical of the bunch, snorted softly as he saw her excitement. "We need bread, not books," he muttered, but he kept his gaze locked on the cryptic symbols, as though they'd hypnotized him. Petra, a small girl with an unruly mop of hair, reached out her grubby fingers and traced one of the swirling patterns on the cover. It felt strangely warm under her touch. Manny, still shorter and younger than the rest, hovered at Brielle's elbow. He didn't say a word, but looked ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. The word grimoire was embossed in faded gold across the top. The orphans, huddled beneath the meager light, looked at one another, hesitant yet intrigued. None were sure what a grimoire truly was, but the word hinted at magic, at secrets centuries old. They caught glimpses of indecipherable script on the inside pages. With no adults around to scold or disbelieve them, the four felt compelled to open it, though the weight of the mysterious book felt uncanny. They retreated to the dilapidated building they called home, an abandoned community center around the corner. Its front windows were smashed, and the rotting wood floors creaked under the slightest movement. Streetlights streamed in through an opening in the roof where a skylight had once been. Brielle set the grimoire on a bench they used as a makeshift table, lighting a stub of a candle beside it. As its flickering glow danced over the ancient pages, the group drew in close. Silas, arms crossed, had an expression that combined worry and fascination. "Okay, so we have this weird book," he said, his voice low. "What now?" Petra had already started flipping through the thick vellum pages, her eyes darting across cryptic diagrams, circles, triangles, runes. Every now and then, arcane symbols seemed to shift under her gaze, as if alive and morphing from one shape into another. Several pages featured instructions in an unfamiliar language. Manny let out a gasp when his eyes fell on a particularly vivid illustration. It depicted a radiant, winged creature with a halo of light, standing triumphant over a masked figure that spat darkness from its mouth. They quickly realized the book contained spells, if that was the right word, and descriptions of creatures said to embody pure goodness. The text claimed that, when conjured properly, these creatures would answer the call to protect and save those in need. The story read like a fairy tale, but as they ran their fingers across the finely drawn images, the membranes of skepticism began to thin. There was an undeniable power humming within these pages. Silas, despite his doubt, felt a surge of adrenaline. That night, they decided to try one of the simpler incantations. After all, no one was around to tell them it was impossible, and it wasn't like they had anything better to do but scrounge for food in the red light district. They formed a circle in the main hall of the abandoned center. One overhead light still worked, flickering on and off in a ghostly rhythm. Brielle whispered the words phonetically, as best she could make out from the swirling text. The children clasped each other's hands, trying to ignore the chill in the air that seeped into their bones. The moment Brielle finished speaking the last unfamiliar syllable, a gentle breeze swept through the hollow building. It breezed in, even though no windows were open, A swirl of golden sparks rose from the center of their circle, dancing and crackling in the humid air. Petra yelped, almost dropping Silas's hand. Manny squeezed Brielle's fingers so hard that she winced. Despite these motions of fear, none of them moved to break the summoning. Their awe overpowered terror as the sparks coalesced into a glowing orb. Then, in a brilliant flash, a figure emerged. It was no taller than a child, but possessed shimmering feathers like that of a celestial bird. The creature's gaze was kind, and when it spread its small wings, a warm, comforting light emanated outward. Almost immediately, the orphans sensed an unusual calm blanket the center's usually eerie atmosphere. The creature spoke in a wordless communication. Its thoughts tickled at the edges of their minds. His presence, although alien, felt nothing but benevolent. The orphans gazed at one another, wide-eyed. Brielle, somehow finding the courage to speak, asked in a trembling voice, Are you here to help?" The creature bowed its head gently, as if in agreement. Then, in a swirl of warm light, it vanished, leaving behind a faint glow still hanging in the air. Long after it disappeared, the 4 children stood stunned. They had done the impossible, summoning a being of goodness right there in the battered remains of their home. It dawned on them that they might have a tool beyond any dream, the power to summon beings that could help them survive. But they did not know the full scope of this magic, nor the cost. Over the next few days, they practiced reading more from the grimoire. The children discovered new passages describing various spirits, each representing virtues like bravery, compassion, wisdom, and justice. Down in the seediest alleyways of the city, they had witnessed real crime, robberies, gang fights, intimidation by older delinquents. They had always done their best to avoid it all, or occasionally slip away with stolen food. But confronting the criminals directly never seemed an option. One fateful evening, while they scavenged near a poorly lit street corner, they heard a woman's scream echo from behind the local bakery's dumpsters. Reacting instinctively, they bolted around to see what was happening. 2 burly men had cornered a terrified woman, demanding she hand over her purse. Her trembling form was pressed against the graffiti-stained wall, eyes darting about for kind souls who might intervene. The children lurked behind a set of boxes, hearts pounding. Ordinarily, they would have been helpless, no match for criminals, but they looked at one another knowingly. They had the grimoire. Brielle carefully opened her backpack. She had taken to carrying the ancient tome wherever they went, just in case. With shaking hands, she flipped to a page describing a small champion of protection, one that was rumored to arrive with a flash of green light. As the threatening men advanced, Silas whispered a quick incantation while Petra's hands trembled against the worn pages. Manny peeked over the boxes, the tension in his chest so thick he felt he could scarcely breathe. When Silas enunciated the final syllable, the air crackled. A swirling glow burst forth behind the criminals, and in a matter of seconds, a radiant creature shaped vaguely like a large, shimmering dog manifested. Its eyes glowed fiercely, and it snarled with a protective energy that made the men recoil instantly, dropping their victim's purse. In the brief confusion that followed, the woman stumbled free, escaping down the street. The dog-like being charged the would-be muggers, though it didn't actually hurt them. Instead, it herded them away, like an angelic shepherd refusing to allow any more harm. The criminals, spooked out of their wits, turned tail and ran, cursing as they fled. The shimmering hound then halted, turned back to the children who emerged from their hiding place and regarded them with silent acknowledgement before fading away into a faint grey mist. Petra couldn't stop smiling the rest of the night. She'd never felt so powerful, or so affirmed that they could do good in a world that had chewed them up and spat them out. Brielle and Silas, the older 2, carried a new sense of responsibility. It was one thing to chase off a pair of muggers, another entirely to truly make a difference in a crime-ridden city. They spent the following days studying the grimoire more carefully. The text spoke of using these summons judiciously, with caution. The creatures from beyond goodness come only for hearts aligned with noble purpose, read one paragraph. It warned also that reckless or selfish use could backfire. Manny, in his innocence, merely wanted to keep summoning the comforting creatures so he would never feel alone. Brielle gently explained that, for the spells to work, their motivations had to be sincere and selfless. Word of vigilantes in the alleys soon spread quietly among the homeless. A few had seen glimpses of shimmering creatures chasing off petty thieves or stopping bullies from roughing up the defenseless. Yet no one knew who these guardians truly were or how they appeared. The children went on carefully orchestrated patrols at dusk, unveiling the grimoire's power only if they witnessed something truly dire. Summoning the creatures often left them exhilarated but drained, as the incantations required focus and a reservoir of goodwill. Still, the four orphans relished the small ways they could push back against the city's dark corners. Night after night, fueled by a deep desire to mend a broken world, they repeated spells. Sometimes it was a shimmering bird of thugs that soared above them, screeching loud enough to scatter a ring of thugs. Other times, it was a tiny star-like fairy that materialized to bring calm to a frantic victim after a mugging. Bystanders rarely understood how exactly these benevolent apparitions arrived. Some believed they were visions of angels. Others thought it was a trick of the streetlights. But for those who saw them, hope sprang anew. The children's emerging reputation as mysterious protectors finally came to the attention of a local gang known as the Irongrave Crew, notorious for running illegal rackets, extortion, and intimidation. Their stomping grounds overlapped with the streets the kids quietly guarded, and soon the gang's underboss, a man named Reggie Cross, grew furious that something or someone was thwarting his men. Fearful rumours travelled the back streets as the gang set about investigating who or what was interfering with their operations. On a particularly chilly evening, Brielle and the others found themselves shadowed by hooded figures while they scouted an abandoned park by the train tracks. They'd heard rumours some of the Irongrave Crew were planning to assault a group of homeless who'd been living under one of the bridges, but even with all their caution, they hadn't noticed they were being watched. Under the dim flicker of a broken street lamp, the children circled up. Brielle placed the old grimoire on her thighs and flipped to a spell for Veil of Protection, one that might hide the homeless camp and keep them safe from intruders. She brushed the page gently, feeling a hum of power under her fingertips. The incantation rose softly from her lips. Petra, Manny, and Silas shut their eyes and concentrated on goodwill. They thought about the hungry, the lonely, and the rejected people they'd seen around the city. A sudden bright shimmer flickered behind them as an aura began to form, swirling into a protective ring near the old overpass. At that moment, a sudden, ragged voice shouted, "There they are!" Slamming footsteps pounded their way. The flicker of gunmetal glinted in the faint moonlight. 3 gang members advanced swiftly, expressions twisted in anger. The largest one flung himself forward, knocking the grimoire from Brielle's hands. She let out a startled cry. The book slid across the pavement, pages fluttering under the lamplight. Silas tried to grab Manny's arm and run, but the younger boy froze in fear. Petra let loose a frantic scream. The protective incantation vanished as soon as Brielle lost her grip on the book. The swirling aura dissipated into a faint sparkle, leaving them vulnerable. One of the gang members lunged at Silas. Silas dodged the first punch, but the second one struck him square in the stomach. He collapsed with a ragged gasp. Manny cowered, tears welling. He might have run, but fear pinned him in place. Bria scrambled on the ground for the grimoire, but a second thug kicked it aside, sending it skidding. "So you're the punks messing with Irongrave territory, huh?" sneered the tall man who'd thrown the punches. "No more fancy tricks?" He crowded Brielle, fists clenched. Behind him, a third thug seemed uneasy, casting a worried glance at the shimmering energy that had just vanished. Then Reggie Cross himself stepped forward out of the shadows, flicking a half-burned cigarette onto the ground. His presence was enough to make the kids quake in terror. He was older, with lines etched across his face from years in the hardest parts of the city. "Kids," Cross said, shaking his head. "Kids with illusions, scaring off my business. I don't know how you did it. Magic or trickery, I don't really care. It ends tonight." Without hesitation, he jabbed a finger toward Manny, and one of the henchmen seized the small boy by the collar. Manny whimpered, tears streaking his cheeks, the lumps in his throat choking any attempt at speech. Brielle's heart raced. She could see Silas doubled over in pain, Petra trying to help him stand. She saw the frightened glint in Manny's eyes and felt hot tears welling in her own. But they'd come too far to give up. Their desire to protect, to serve goodness, was stronger than fear. Brielle summoned all of her courage. She dove for the grimoire once again, managing to grasp its corner before the thugs realized her intent. She flung it open, scanning the pages with desperate urgency. She had no time for a complicated incantation. Her fingertips landed on a partial verse for summoning something known as the Guardian of the Downtrodden, a formidable being of compassion and protection. She had only read glimpses of it before. Under normal circumstances, she would never try something so advanced. But they had no choice. Manny, though terrified, heard her muttering incantations and clung to the knowledge that the magic responded to love and empathy. Gathering the last of his shattered composure, he forced the trembling of his heart into a single determined conviction. "Yes," Manny thought, "we want to save people. We want to do good." Petra, too, repeated the line in her mind. Silas, wincing through the pain, mumbled the words that he could remember, and as the last syllables echoed beneath that street lamp, the pages of the grimoire blazed with a brilliant golden white light. Reggie Cross slapped his hands over his eyes. His goons stumbled backward with shouts of alarm. The intense radiance gathered in a pillar between the children and their assailants, like a protective tower. In that shimmering glow, a tall figure materialized, armored in something that looked like shining crystal. Its face was obscured by a gentle aura, and two wings of prismatic light arced from its back. The gangsters raised their weapons, uncertain whether to shoot or run. The Guardian didn't even blink. Bolts of soft energy, neither lethal nor violent, but suffused with an unassailable presence, interfused the air, driving the gang members stumbling away as if weighted by unimaginable guilt. Cross spat furiously and aimed a handgun at the shimmering being, pulling the trigger. The shot rang out across the concrete, but before the bullet could strike, the Guardian's radiant wing caught it. The projectile dissolved into harmless sparks. Trembling with fury, Cross tried to fire again, but found himself unable to raise his hand. An invisible pressure forced his weapon down, as if pinning him in place. The other men, disoriented and partially blinded by the brightness, simply dropped their knives and stammered in confusion. "Enough!" The Guardian's voice was soundless yet resonant, ringing inside the minds of everyone present. Reggie Cross stared in wonder, sweat dripping down the side of his face. The luminous being advanced, its presence unwavering. Fear and awe warred for control in the gangster's eyes. At last, he gave a strangled grunt. He gestured for the others to back away, no longer eager to contest whatever power these kids wielded. Within seconds, the men retreated, half running and stumbling, leaving behind curses and threats hanging in the air. When they were gone, the Guardian turned toward the orphans. Its form emitted a wave of warmth and solace that eased Silas's pain and quieted Manny's sobs in an instant. Riel didn't know how to speak to something so powerful, but she mustered a whisper of gratitude. The Guardian nodded, its expression kind behind the glowing veil. Then it vanished, dissolving into flurries of soft light. The children sank to the ground, relief washing over them in waves, tears of gratitude mixing with exhaustion. In that moment, the city around them felt a bit less cold and a bit less lonely. Over the next few hours, they huddled together in the abandoned community center, leaning on one another for support. Silas's bruises would heal in time. Benny had not entirely stopped shaking, but both Petra and Brielle were at his side, comforting him. The grimoire lay in Brielle's lap, faint traces of shimmering glow lingering in its pages. They knew that the Irongrave crew was still out there, and they might seek revenge. But they also knew they would continue to stand up for the helpless. The empowering presence of the Guardian's memory buoyed their spirits. "Maybe we should take the grimoire somewhere safe," Silas said eventually. "It's too dangerous to keep out in the open." Brielle bit her lip, eyes skimming the battered interior of the center. "For now, we can't let them get their hands on it. They'd twist it into something awful." She looked at Manny's small, grimy hands, trembling on his knees, and covered them with her own. "But we can keep helping, too. We can't hide forever." Petra stared at the battered gym floor. "Other orphans still need help. Other homeless, too. We can't turn away from them after all this." The 4 young vigilantes had been thrust from desperate survival into a role none of them had expected. They exchanged resolute glances. They would do what needed to be done to protect people who had no other champions. In the weeks that followed, they learned to be more strategic in their efforts. They avoided brazen displays of power and conferred about each mission, always mindful of the grimoire's warnings. Some nights, they offered a blanket of illusions to shroud vulnerable camps from marauding criminals. Other nights, they conjured watchers of pure light perched on rooftops, scaring off potential wrongdoers. The fleeting glimpses of these otherworldly protectors stirred rumors throughout the city, whispers of angels or guardian spirits that defended the poorest. Harsher whispers suggested that something unnatural haunted the streets, but the children remained undeterred. They also learned that good deeds echoed back in unexpected ways. The people they saved sometimes left behind small tokens of gratitude. One morning, they discovered a basket of bread rolls near their hideout, with a note scrawled in messy handwriting, "Thank you." Another time, a local fruit vendor spontaneously offered them apples when they passed by. Though they still dressed in tattered clothing, the street orphans no longer felt invisible. In a place where desperation had once dominated every waking moment, they found bonds forming, subtle, intangible threads weaving a community together, all because of a chance encounter with a magical find in the darkest part of town. Their purpose, they realized, extended beyond personal survival. They had the power to summon creatures of goodness. And with that came a responsibility. No matter how merciless the streets, or how bleak the night sky could appear, they would be the bright spot in its shadowy corners. Because, although they were children with empty pockets, adopting roles they never asked for, they had discovered there was far more to them than the city ever gave them credit for. Still, they harbored no illusions of invincibility. They knew that Reggie Cross and others like him wouldn't rest quietly. So they kept to the fringes, stealthy in their guardianship. Through it all, they slept in shifts at the community centre, grimoire nestled between them like an ancient treasure. On restless nights, Manny would listen for the faint hum of magic emanating from the pages, reassured that it was still on their side. Petra, meanwhile, found solace in learning new incantations, constructing small illusions of kindness that could calm a frightened child or guide a lost soul to safety. Silas continued to serve as a watchful protector for the group, teaching them street smarts he'd honed over a lifetime in these alleys. And Brielle, unwaveringly, kept the flame of hope bright, even when the threat of the Irongrave crew bore down upon them. Step by step, their presence expanded. They may have been living on the fringes of society, but there was no denying the ripple effect of their interventions. Fewer desperate souls found themselves victims of petty crime, and more people whispered about the magical light in the city's darkest corners. While the city's police and authorities largely dismissed the stories as urban legend, those who lived close to the gutter believed. They saw living proof that not all magic was dark or dangerous, that sometimes the extraordinary could be harnessed for the good of ordinary folk, and that, sometimes, the smallest among us were chosen to carry the heaviest burdens, whether by fate or happenstance. And so, the 4 street orphans carried on. Their battered shoes slapped against wet pavement as they trekked along the forlorn roads, scanning every shadow. Every time they encountered injustice, they knew they had a choice. Turn away or open the pages of the grimoire and invite goodness into the world once more. He chose goodness. People in quieter corners began calling them the Alleyway heroes. No one knew their names, only that they were rumoured to be children living among the trash heaps and graffiti, protected by magical beings of light. That name spread from one hungry mouth to another, through hushes of gratitude and reverence. The orphans themselves never spoke the label out loud. They simply understood in their hearts that, in a city so big and broken, even the smallest spark of hope could chase away the darkness. In time, they would greet new challenges. The Irongrave crew might grow bolder, or even stranger threats might arise, drawn by the magic that shimmered in unexpected places. But the children no longer felt alone. In the swirling lines of the old, worn grimoire, they'd discovered a promise that goodness, once invoked with sincerity, answered even the faintest call. They had become more than just survivors. They were guardians, forging a different path from the rubble left by society's neglect. And in every summoning, every radiant being that fluttered or flew or roared into existence, Brielle, Petra, Silas and Manny reminded the city that goodness, no matter how fragile, was impossible to snuff out. Though they had begun as mere street kids, rummaging for scraps, they now stood as quiet champions of their own domain, weaving a shield of magic and benevolence around the forgotten. Their footsteps might still echo against cracked asphalt, but behind the taps of their worn soles was something far more potent, the determined pulse of hope. And with the grimoire always close at hand, they stepped into each new night, ready to summon kindness into a world that desperately needed it. The city's alleyways might be dark and dangerous, but thanks to them, those same alleyways now knew the glimmer of something pure, something that refused to fail those who had no other protectors.